Thank you so much. And what I'm going to talk about today is about disruption, and about the disruption mindset that all of us have to take on today, because the world is filled with so many challenges, but so many opportunities too. And the question I'm going to pose to you for today, and also for the next few days as you go through this conference, is this: who are you going to be? Who are you going to be when disruption comes calling for you, if it hasn't already? Who are you going to be when disruption comes knocking on your door? How will you respond? Are you going to be the disruption victor, the person who rises up to that challenge to lead your organization into that fight? Or are you going to be a disruption victim, standing aside because you don't believe that you and your organization have even a fighting chance? So who are you going to be? And my premise is that the decision of who you're going to be is completely dependent on your mindset, on whether you're going to adopt a disruption mindset. And I'm going to talk about three things tonight. I'm going to talk about, in particular, strategy and culture and leadership. Because I believe that in order for us to take on disruption and to wring as much opportunity out of that, to be able to thrive with it, we have to have a different way of thinking about each of these areas. So let me start with strategy. And in particular, when I think about strategy, I think about not the tactics or things that you want to do, but in particular, focusing on your future customer. Let me explain that. So we know that customers are the lifeblood of every organization. But what does that mean? So just a quick show of hands here. How many of you are working on customer experience? And I know this audience, you're not necessarily customer facing, but how many of you are working on customer experience? Well, this is the premise I would put to you, that if you are not focused on the customer experience, you are working on the wrong thing. Now, you may be asking, I never see a customer. I never talk to them. Or if I do, it's only in passing. But what about the end customer, internal customers, and all those experiences that you have to build together? My belief is that everybody in the organization, up and down throughout the organization, needs to in some way understand how their work, everything that they do, ties back to the customer experience. Because if you're not focused on that, the minute you take your eye off of that ball, your competitor is going to be doing it better and faster than you. And it's no longer enough to just focus on your current customer. For those of you who are hockey fans, you know this quote, Wayne Gretzky, the great. He doesn't skate to where the puck is, he skates to where the puck is going to be. So the question is, are you and your organization skating to where that future customer is? Or are you focused over here on this customer today, doing a good job of managing and working them, but the length of your strategy, the purview of how far into the future you look at, is only in the next quarter, maybe in the next 12 months. And guess where disruption is looking? It's looking over here, and it's chasing after your customer. So the key point about your strategy is that you have to be chasing after the fastest moving customer that you hope to serve, because you're already behind. So focusing on that future customer should be the centerpiece of your strategy. Let me give you an example. I'm going to take one from education, Southern New Hampshire University. They're a tiny little campus of 3,000 students. Guess where? Southern New Hampshire. And when Paul LeBlanc, the CEO of the university and president, took over, he said, we really need to think about how we can grow this campus, because the need is so great. They don't serve the typical 17 or 18-year-old coming out of college. They're typically serving people who are coming out of the military, people mid-career doing a pivot. They're working with moms trying to return back into the workforce. So he looked around the campus and found this little group in the online division and said, maybe we could use that. So in 2003, he decided to work on that. In 2008, was ready to launch it, and the financial crisis hit, and so did his big budget deficit. So the question became, does he go forward with his plan to move into the online space? Or does he conserve his cash and try to keep the university afloat? And the thing that he realized was that he had to go serve and chase after those future students, those future customers of his, because that's where the opportunity lay, and that's also where his purpose lay as a university. So they developed the online space, have grown it tremendously. They're the #1 online provider of accredited 4-year degrees, completely online. Continue to operate and innovate in so many ways. They will serve over 100,000 students this year, and their 5-year plan is to double that within this short 5 years. And on top of that, they're going to be serving the hardest citizens and people to serve, including 50,000 refugees in Kenya and Rwanda. Now think about audacious goals and disrupting education. That's what SNHU is doing. And only because he's aligned the entire organization to focus on that future student, that future customer. So change your mindset. Strategy isn't just what you will do today. It isn't just about the technology. It's really focused on that customer and that future customer. But let's go on and think about culture too as well, because culture is just as important. And in particular, I think there are some things about culture that we think, in many ways, how can we change this? But in my research, I have found that if you change beliefs and behaviors and then the operating model that follows from that, you can systematically change culture to be more disruptive. And why is culture so important? Because in the end, I believe this, culture eats strategy for breakfast every single day. You could have the most beautiful strategy, but if your culture isn't tuned to be able to execute it, it won't matter. But if you have a fantastic culture, one that can live in a constant state of flux, then guess what? You'll be able to figure out what the strategy will be. You'll be able to figure out that this customer is actually moving in a zigzag way and chase after them in such an agile way that you'll be able to figure out that strategy along the way. So how do you change culture? I believe that there are 2 things you have to look at. You have to think about the belief systems that you have inside the organization. Do you believe that you can disrupt yourself? Do you believe that you can actually challenge and change things? And then very importantly, do your behaviors change because of those beliefs? In my research, I found that there are 5 beliefs around this idea of living in a state of flux versus a state of constantness, of being status quo, of being stuck. Who wants to be in a stuck organization? Instead, you could be in an organization that's capable of dealing with change, living in a state of flux and being comfortable with that. What was interesting in the research was that the #1 belief is this belief in discipline and execution, in that there's a certain way to do things, and we're going to execute and be disciplined about the way we live our culture. You walk into these disruptive organizations, and culture is really strong, and the discipline around living that culture is there. But they also have tremendous openness and transparency, which creates accountability. There's a sense of ownership, that it's my responsibility to be able to create this change. There's also a sense of challenge, that I can go and talk to my boss's boss without any reparations. And then finally, there's agility, the thing that we aim for, but you can never achieve agility unless you have these other 4 beliefs there too as well. Let me give you an example from a bank of all places, ING Bank in the Netherlands. In the 2008 financial crisis, they realized that they were not moving fast enough. They knew that the customers were moving into the digital space, into online banking, and they were not moving anywhere quickly as fast as their customers. So they said, how can we do this? How can we, as headquarters in particular, with finance and HR and IT, all of these areas, be able to move faster at the speed of our customers? So they said, we need to change the way that we think, the things that we believe in. So they did this. They rewrote their beliefs. They created something called the Orange Code. And as you can see from here, there are all these ideas that represent those flux beliefs that I talk about. You take it on and make it happen around discipline and execution. You help others to be successful, a sense of ownership, and you are always a step ahead, being that agility. And they decided over the course of a year to completely go into agile teams, tribes as they were called. And the number one way that you could get hired back into your own team, because there are no more departments, was how well do you live and believe in the Orange Code? That was the number one criteria, because they believed that we can teach you all the skills that you need to be successful, but we can't change the way you think. We can't change your belief and value system. So one day they went off to a stadium in the Netherlands, outside of Amsterdam, declared that the old ING no longer existed, and that they went back to their offices the next day, and the org charts looked like this. All agile teams. There were no more departments. There was no more IT department. It was all around these work teams that worked on internal projects, worked on external-facing customer projects, all integrated into these agile teams that worked in a completely different way. But they did this the right way. They changed their beliefs before they changed their operating model. And they made sure that everybody was aligned. They had the discipline to make sure that those beliefs were aligned with each other so that they had confidence and stability in the face of all the change that they were going to have to do. So here's a question for you. What beliefs are holding you and your organization back? Which ones do you need to get rid of? The things that, the behaviors and beliefs that go with them that are holding you back that you no longer want to ascribe to. But just as importantly, what are the beliefs that you must adopt to move forward? What are the behaviors associated with those beliefs that you want people to be behaving now? So we talked about strategy, we talked about culture. Let's talk about leadership. Because leadership, in many ways, is very different when you're creating disruption, when you're creating huge amounts of disruptive, transformational change. And the key difference is that you have to create a movement. And movement is so important because, in many ways, what you're asking people to do is something impossible. We could never have done this strategy before. You're asking us to completely change the way that we think about the world. And yes, that is what you do as a leader. You see the change, and you create that change, and you motivate the people, inspire them to follow you. And what better way to do that than to create a movement? I want to give an example of a movement in action that we all are very familiar with, and that is the civil rights movement. What did Martin Luther King do? Was he at the very front of this? In many ways, he was a spokesperson, but he used his words, he used his stories to inspire people. This is not a movement led from the front. And a movement doesn't move if it can't do it without you. And in so many ways, this is your challenge as a leader in your organization. How will you create a movement for change? Because that's the change that you really want to see happen. Let me give you one example of a company who did this. And this is T-Mobile. Back in 2012, they were really stuck. They were a distant fourth player. A proposed merger with AT&T completely fell apart, and they were really stuck. And they were asking themselves, what do we do? How do we think about our strategy for the future? And one of the things they did some research and said, what is it that customers want? But not just today, but in the future, and also what was really frustrating them? What were they not getting from all of the other mobile carriers? And they found that they were extremely unhappy. They were frustrated because of these contracts that tied them in for 2 years. They couldn't upgrade their phone for 2 years because they were in this contract. And frankly, they didn't even know what the contract had in it. They just signed it and had no idea that it was so restrictive. And so T-Mobile said, no one's really looking out there. No one's fighting the cause for the customer. So we're going to take on that banner. We're going to put on that mantle and become something completely different, become the Un-carrier. Now, what I found so interesting about this wasn't just a slogan that changed. Everything changed. They tore up the contracts. They trained their call centers and their retail salespeople to sell and to interact with customers in a completely different way. What was fascinating, they even told them, yeah, here's the rule book, and here are the opportunities and places where you should really throw the rule book out. Here are the scenarios where you really need to be on the customer side and listening to them. And they also were very lucky. They got a new leader. a new CEO by the name of John Ledger. And John Ledger had to go through his own transformation. So just to give you an idea, this is a before and after picture of him. This is what he looked like as a CEO beforehand, and this is what he looks like today. Radically different. In many ways, what he said was, I have to become the uncarrier too. And today, he is constantly on social media, he is out there challenging carriers and constantly advocating for customers and for the employees. And I do believe he has nothing but magenta and black in his wardrobe today. So one of the interesting things about leadership in this case was that T-Mobile decided that we weren't just going to just become the uncarrier, have a charismatic CEO actively engaged with all of these new employees and customers, especially millennials and social media. They also said, let's make this truly a movement. And they created something called the Uncarrier Manifesto. And it says all of these things. We believe that people deserve to know what's in their contracts. We believe that everyone else is in the phone business. We are in the phone breaking industry business. And it's a call to arms, not only for their employees, but also for the customer, saying, this is what we believe. If you're going to create transformational change, if you're going to create disruptive change and be able to thrive in it, you have to start thinking about how you will create a movement. And in particular, there are 3 things that I recommend about how you think about creating a movement. The first one is to keep the relationships with the people you are trying to create that movement with. Because a leader is maybe, in so many ways, just a relationship between a leader who aspires to create change and the people who are inspired by them to create that change. So how will you actually do that? You have to keep that relationship with your followers, thinking about followership at the center of that movement. The other thing I would encourage you to do is to create a manifesto. And one of the best ways to do this is start with a rant. What's wrong with the world? You can say all those things, like, I think that the world is completely messed up in this area. And then you flip it, make it a positive. Because the world is so messed up in this area, we believe that we need to change in order to do this. That's how you begin writing a manifesto, with looking at all the things that are wrong that you believe need to change. And I think this last area, around creating a consistent leadership presence, is so key. Oftentimes, we as leaders like to sit in the back, take on what we call a servant leader, which is a very valuable idea, but not if it's used as an excuse not to be leading from the front. There are many, many effective leaders out there, but I think they can be even more effective if they can go out there and use all of these digital tools to be able to engage those followers who want to hear from you. I hear so many excuses from leaders. I don't have the time. What do you mean you don't have time? How could you not have time to connect with customers? How could you not have time to connect with your employees? It's as if somebody was knocking at your door, somebody was ringing on your phone, and you decide that you are not going to answer. You're going to ignore them. How dare you do that as a leader? At a minimum, I think leaders need to think about how to embrace that digital in your organizations, because you're so connected into the rest of the organization being the core foundation of it. It becomes even more important for you to express what is going on, what is on your mind. I think the other great excuse I hear from people oftentimes is, who cares what I talk about and eat over lunch? I mean, I see people posting pictures of their food and everything. Who cares about that? And I would agree. I really don't care what you had for lunch. What I care about is what you talked about over lunch. What's on your mind? As my leader, do you think we're doing a good job? Are we falling down? Are we not meeting our expectations? Talk to me. And the beauty of the digital space now is that you can do this in so many different ways without the friction in the past, if we only have the courage to step up to that plate and to be able to engage in this way. So I think in many ways, leadership needs to change. It needs to take a very different type of mindset, one that challenges us to move out into this space and become leaders in a very different way to lead a movement. I want to close out by thinking about some of the key areas around disruption. And this is a test for yourself. How ready are you to lead disruption? What is your disruption quotient? And what I mean by that is your ability to challenge the status quo and to change a situation that you think could lead to a better outcome. Think of that number. Pick a number between 1 and 10 and know where you stand today. Understand how you are moving forward into this space or not. Where are the places where you're going to have to challenge yourself? And frankly, where are the places where you're going to have to move out of your comfort zone? Because it's only when you move out of your comfort zone that the magic happens. And I think in many ways, this disruptive space that we're all moving into requires that we think about this in a very different way. Because when you're thinking about disruption, this is not something for the faint of heart. This is something that brave leaders need to come forward to. And as you're sitting here thinking today, as you go through the next few days, think about this again. Who are you going to be? Who are you going to be when that disruption comes knocking on your door? Because I guarantee you, it's already there knocking. And so when you get up from your seats today, as you go out into this conference, take on that disruption mindset and think about things in a different way. And I guarantee you, you know you are doing it right when your palms are sweating and your stomach is churning. And for all of us who live at the edge of that security, you're looking at the cliff and seeing the wide abyss, that's what being a leader is when you have the courage to engage in that way. I wish you all the best on your journeys as you go through it. And in many ways, I more than anything else, wish that you have the courage to take on this disruption mindset because your organization needs you today. In order for you to move into this disruption mindset, think about all the problems that are out there. We need more disruptors to make the change happen in our organizations, in our society, and in our world. So I wish you all the best of luck in that journey, and I thank you very much.